Maybe the last thing we have to discuss is the entropy and related characteristics. So I'll give in presentation both classical case and quantum case. I'm not sure about doing this in parallel. So the entropy and related characteristics maybe it's a good thing to read some of them. I would say mutual information. Relative entropy. Sometimes it's called divergence. And things like this. So let me start, and maybe you know this, and so it's maybe served as a brief reminder about classical case. When we're talking about entropy in classical system, actually we always deal with some kind of random variable. In the communication context, just assume that Alice did some random experiments, and there are some outcomes of experiments characterized by the probabilities of the outcomes, and you want to characterize this, the measure of uncertainty about the results of measurements before learning this. So, so we have X is a random variable that's described or white class things, and in particular can assign this to an outcome of randomly performed experiments, things like this. So maybe you flip coin and you don't know heads or tail. So head or tail, actually one of the most simplest example of such kind. So-called Bernoulli random variable, and actually, there are some the values that random variable may take. there's some randomness about the variables. So actually, of course, the limiting case when there is no randomness and you know exactly what is the value of your variable. So and you want to characterize uncertainty. So you want to characterize the degree of uncertainty. About x before the argument. It's down here. Here we go. I can rephrase it in terms of the quantity of information you've got when you learn the value of random variables. So actually, this is nothing but the information you've got when somebody tells you the information about the value of random variable. So actually, if you know that there are no randomness and you know the values, or if somebody tells you the value, you've got zero information. So there's nothing added. If somebody tells you about the deterministic results of the experiment, so you know that this is the only outcome possible of this experiment. But okay. What the idea? The idea is that this, when we are talking about particular value of the random variable, the logarithm, sometimes called characterizes information contents for this particular real value of random variable. So it's kind of a degree of surprise when somebody tell you that the value is xi. For example, if the probability is close to zero, yes. So the smaller the probability, the larger this quantity. So, and somebody told you that this is what is the case, you'll be surprised. But if the probability is close to unity, close to 1, so no, it comes as no surprise. So you're expecting this result. And and actually, what you want to do, but this characterize a bit too detailed because we are talking about particular value of the variable. So you want to, let's say, average this quantity, and you obtain something like this.
May I ask a stupid question? The idea to use logarithm as a way to measure entropy was taken due to connection with bits. So
Yeah, yes. Actually, what you want to do next, if you have two independent random variables, so you want additivity, so you want that, if they are statistically independent, so you want that this information should be additive. So characterize, because they are independent, so we expect that the degree will be the sum of these degrees of uncertainty for each variable. That's, yes, of course you can say formulate a number of property you expect from the quantity which characterizes the degree of information or degree of uncertainty for random variables. Did you use this formula starting from this requirement? But it's a bit not that helpful. So actually, I just followed this axiomatic construction of the entropy, because this quantity is what is called classical entropy, right? So
I also got a question. A random variable x can take only two values, 0 and 1, or
no,
any value?
So Simon, there are several. This is written for the case of discrete random variables,
Okay.
and there is a number of possible values of this random.
And the base of logarithm is not changed when
Yes,
it comes to multiple outcomes.
Anyway, your graph is log, and the base is always assumed to be 2. So that's actually, and mathematically doesn't matter, because any logarithm are proportional to this. So, for example, I can use natural logarithm, and it will produce not only the the coefficient which is proportional. But historically, in order to have this completely random one-bit situation, given you the result equals unity, which equals unity, it is assumed that the logarithm is, the base of logarithm is 2. So actually it is nothing but the definition of entropy. And sometimes I will say this a note about notation, a word about notation. You may somehow indicate that this is a probability for the random variable x, and it depends on the x small, indicating the values of the random variables. So this is a bit shorter, because I just starting out of this one. Sometimes I will put I will indicate by the index x capital, indicating what is a random variable I'm talking about. If it's clear, there is now uncertainty about the random variable, also can be omitted for brevity. But this is presumably the most detailed notation for the probability. So this is a distribution of probability for the random variable x. So and the entropy characterizes the distribution of probabilities of the random variable, rather than the values of random variable. You see that this quantity is independent on the values. it depends only on the probabilities. So it depends on, it characterizes how random are when this variable on the, so this is the entropy. And sometimes it's called a Shannon entropy because this is a classical situation. Because classical entropy and quantum entropy are closely related, I will use the same notation for both. Shannon. In the literature, sometimes different notations are used for Shannon entropy and for one entropy, but we will use the same notation. H. Okay.
There is no significant difference between these two ways to write down the form of entropy. I mean, with help of index I and with just when we do the sum.
Yes, of course, it's just notation. Just the same. It means the same. The simplest thing is that, for example, when we have classical bit 0, 1, and we have 2, say P, equals 1 and 5. So we are talking about C bit. Classical bit. And actually we have for this sometimes it's called as H2P, binary entropy, and we'll get things like minus P. Something very simple. Okay. So the graph, we'll see that this is can be easily obtained. So what does it looks like?
The graph of this entropy.
HD and P here, and of course P ranges from 0 to 1. So the endpoint represent deterministic case. So it means that we, for example, if P equals 0, it means that the probability that the value equals 1 equals unity. So we have the certain. We are certain about the
The
value.
entropy will be 0.
Entropy clearly will be 0. And once again, if I just put it, you'll get, say, 0 here. I will get logarithm of unity and it's 0. And here I will get product 0 and 0. So we have already know that this is a limit which is also gives 0.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and actually, what happens now,
Mhm.
things like this. And it's not difficult to see that the maximum is located at the value of t equals 1/2. So we have a case of equiprobable distribution. So
Maximum equilibrium.
when we flip the cards,
If the coin is unbiased,
yes,
of course.
Who is advised?
Coin.
so if you want to look at these as output of experiments, so the experiment should be independent and the coin should be symmetric and things like this. And idealized situation. So actually we've got unity here, and that's why the base of logarithm is taken to be equal to in order to get unity here for binary random variable. Right. So classical bit is just a binary random variable. Or sometimes it's called binary random variable. Let's looking at this example, it's clear. The deterministic cases, in the general case, we will get 0 value of entropy. For example, if I talking about in a generalized case, when you have more than 2 values characterizing for the random variable, so this is around the same. If we have situation when all the probability equals 0 except for 1. So, because we've got things like here, so we've got 1p equals 0, I will get this equals 0 as well. So this is 1p gives me 0, and this actually, of course, 1, and once again, and here, when p equals unity, I will get 0 as well. So, clearly, entropy can be negative. So it's defined in such a way that all the terms are non-negative. So the first thing is that entropy, in general, non-negative. An interesting thing happened. What about the maximum one? What do you think?
Maximum what?
It depends on the number of possible outcomes.
Yes, and let's suppose that we have n as a number of possible outcomes. Sometimes it's denoted like this, so the number of values characterizing the random variable. So, and
It will be log n.
2 in power of n.
For example,
so we want to say that this is just a vector. clearly, after we know this more or less clear that the entropy is invariant under, with respect to permutation. Now, let's suppose that I have just the thing I'm doing is to permute the values of random variable. So permutation of random variables actually is equivalent to permutation of probabilities.
You mean
Let's
that,
say-
for example, we get one result, one random variable, then we get the other one. Permutation means that we interchange the order of obtaining, kind of.
Once again,
Or what is
it depends on,
permutation?
for example, you have x1, xn, right? And here we have. This is how we assign probability to the variables. And now what I want to do, just to permute the values. But assignment is the same.
Okay.
Or I may permute the probabilities. I will get, in general, get different random variable. Because I will, in this case, I assign different probability to different values. For example, if you have 2, I may say x2 p1, p2, and so these are two different random variables. But actually, of course, because the set of probabilities is the same, the only thing I've done is just permute these variables.
Okay. Yeah,
So
you
that-
said that the
Doesn't matter. So, so actually, I'll just comment this about after discussing this permutation probability, right? And we'll get back here after that. So actually we have that n, and any permutation is that permutation. So for two values we have entropy P1, P2 equals entropy for P2, P1. Defined.
Permutation перестановка.
Permutation, yes. So if you get back here, okay, I can say that I have to maximize max. And let's suppose that I will find a distribution that represents the maximum value of entropy. Okay, but this distribution, if this value and the probabilities are different, will be realized for several probabilities, because permutation, for example, if I've got this P1 max and Pn max, and actually this is nothing but for any permutation. So if the probability is different, so I will have several points where the entropy reaches its maximum value. So if I assume that we have only one distribution where the entropy where the entropy is maximal, then it should be invariant under the permutation. And actually it implies that it should be equal. So, and actually it will give us the chaotic distribution, equiprobable distribution, right? So equiprobable distribution gives a maximum value of the entropy, and it's indeed this is nothing but one. So this is a maximum. So this is a thing that we might expect from the very beginning, because the more random, the more chaotic distribution, the larger the value of uncertainty. So, and the larger the value of information that we may obtain after learning the narrative of the random variable. So, okay. So let's continue with properties and the important property for concavity. 3. What the idea? Let's suppose we have the random variables that take the same values but differs in probabilities. So, for example, we have the x1 and the x2. Just assuming that we have, let's say, x1 and x2. The values are identical. What I want to do is to construct distribution as a convex, let's say lambda x. Not large, small. That's true. So this is a convex linear combination of distribution, right? So, for example, this is a way how I can construct general probability. For example, let's assume we have only two values. So, and this probability, this random value, we present deterministic random values. For example, x1 assumes that the value of random variable 0, and x2 assumes that the value of the random value is unity, right? So this is nothing but linear convex combination which represents the general case. This is no longer deterministic, and lambda and unity minus lambda represent the probability for x0 and 1, for example. So, so any random variable can be written in terms of deterministic distributions, and the coefficient will define probabilities. Right? But anyway,
Why there is a small x2?
yeah, what do you? It says no. This is not small.
Okay.
Okay, let me be a bit more clear about the notations. So, and what I want to do is to compare x and x1 x2. So each of these random variables, for each of these random variables, I can compute the entropy, right? And actually, lambda and now I want to compare this with the result that I obtain for this random variable constructed using convex linear combination. What about this sign? What do you think? Larger, smaller?
Unity.
So, 2 and here.
Less or equal.
Assumes
Less or equal.
but here is something, the point here and the value here. So we've got things like
Larger.
okay, so the answer is easy. Let's. So we have things like. Right. So the functions that enter the definition of our entropy looks like this, right? And what I want to do is to compare with, for example, we have P1 and P2 there. So this is just one term here in this, and in with entropy, so we get things like lambda and here. And so on. And what I want to do is to compare this with which one is larger. So now the question boils down to the answer to the behavior of this function p minus p log 2p. So what I want to know is this function concave or convex. That's all I need to know in order to answer this question. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's easy to answer. For example, we know from the maybe math or elementary math, let's say elementary calculus, that, for example, I can compute second derivative. If I want to do this, actually it doesn't matter if I'm using, for example, natural logarithm. It's a bit more convenient for calculations. It will not change the character of the function, right? For example, for such function, I will convert to second. So the result will not be changed if I replace log the base of logarithm. The result, because both bases are larger than unity, so what's the result? Can you compute it?
Second derivative. Yes.
Yeah.
And by here is simple function, yes. By a simple function.
Probability.
Derivative with respect to p, of course. This is a function of p. So concavity. So this is an example of concave function. So it's clear that the second derivative should be negative in order for the function to be concave. Is it true or not?
It's true.
So we will get things like because we have p non-negative, so we'll get things like so it means that this is a concave function. And this concave function implies that this should be larger than this for any values of P1 or P2, non-negative of course. Okay, so it's rather elementary properties of another let me generalize to the case of two random variables, and we have, for example, random variables x and y. Right. And the corresponding probabilities now depend on two arguments. So x just represents the value of the variable x capital, and small y represents the value of y capital. So just two random variables. Any number of variables can be considered. This is a joint probability, because it's not necessarily that this random variables are independent. It might be correlated. So it's a joint probability. And once again, if I want to reduce my description, I'm interested in only one of these random variables, or I can sum all the values of the remaining random variable. We've already discussed. So actually, I will have the things x, y. So nothing unexpected happens here. Once again, to be that's one, right.
Exceeding knowledge, one more time please. Concave function, it is a function with a minimum, or it is about convergence?
Not about convergence, it's behavior. Convexity, convex function, concave function.
It's like выпуклая вогнутая.
Convex, concave.
So convex has a minimum, and it's concave.
If you're talking about extremal points, then that. But it's not necessarily so. It may look something like, if you want. So generally it is not related to the minima or maxima.
Just about how we trend.
Okay. So this is a generalized representation of the entropy for two random variables, and actually it's more or less clear what will happen if the random variables are statistically independent. So
we can separate probabilities.
Statistical independence statistically independent actually means that xy factorizes or to be incomplete notations x y. And we shall also need a notion from the probability theory about conditional probability. And here we say that this is nothing but the sum entropy for each random variable. So we see that this joint entropy equals to the sum of marginal entropies, actually, when the random variables are statistically independent. But you may ask what happens if the random variables are not statistically independent. So you must say that what about the case, what do we expect from the entropy if I compare so now I'm not assuming statistical independence. I'm assuming that these entropy are computed for marginal distributions. But once again, it means that Px x is nothing but sum over y, and similar thing for y.
Looks like partial trees.
Yes. If you want, it's a classical tracing out of a random, of additional environment. So this is an analog. So these are the marginal probabilities that define these entropies. So these entropies are computed for marginal variables. And once again, the question, so what about the sign?
But they are statistical dependent.
Less.
Less or larger?
Less, I guess, usually less. It looks like always when we separate, when we sum two separate.
So we've lost some information.
Yeah,
Tracing
lost
out
information.
just erases information about one of the random variables. So it should increase uncertainty. So maybe we may suspect that this is should be larger, right? Okay, we will see a bit. We will get back here a bit later to this. This is a so-called sub-additivity. So instead of additivity when they equal. So entropy is additive for statistically independent random variables, but it is sub-additive
Because we lost
or
some
correlated. Yes, because here we have two random variables and they somehow correlated. And tracing out, and when I'm talking about marginal distributions, I will get the random variables where these correlations are erased. So I increase somehow uncertainty. Actually, the questions can be a bit more specific. How can I compare these two things? Let's forget about that. It still remains larger or not. And to ask this question, presumably another important type of entropy is a so-called conditional entropy. So let me discuss this notion first. So we've got things like this, and I want to do what we need to know from the probability theory is that we have the joint probability Kxy. So then before, and also I know the marginal probability, for example, for x or for y. Doesn't matter. I will be talking about y. This is a general formula. For angles PAB, if you want, or other thing. Simplified notations. Just commented on the index indicating the random variables. So for now, what we are talking about, the conditional probabilities, assuming that we have some stuff. We know the value of one of the random variables, for example, y. So this describes the probability when we know one of the part of the system, and the remaining part of uncertainty is characterized by the conditional entropy. So let me be specific. So I may say that, for example, if I know the x, that y is y. So the idea is just to use conditional probability. So this is conditional probability. So the idea, single thing, is that you got things like y And now the value of y is fixed, and the sum is over x. The values of the random value x. And but it's a bit too special. It depends on the value of random variable, right? And the idea is to characterize what the conditionality to represent is to compute expected value of this conditional entropy, and actually expected value implies that I will average over the value of y. So expected value, and the expected value, so somehow I average over possible values of y, and it is nothing but what is called once again y. So I'm averaging over the y. So the value multiplied by the probability and summing over the value. So once again, here the conditional probability appears to be average of these probabilities. And actually, once let's have a look that conditional probabilities possess all the properties of usual probability, right? So it's a non-negative and the sign equals unity. So actually, one of these brackets can be negative, right? And once again, and here I'm averaging non-negative quantity. And once again, of course, I will get non-negatives. That's an important thing to notice. And let me continue with this expression. So this is just the conditional entropy. This is what we call the conditional entropy. And an interesting thing is that fix things like this. So once again, the product of this probability and this probability will give me giant probability, but by definition, right? So this is nothing but xy. And something which remains the same. So this is a general case. So and actually I can, for example, replace this logarithm of difference between a logarithm for joint probability and the marginal probability. So actually, when you notice that this is logarithm And once again, the product of conditional probability and marginal probability is a joint probability, but now I have to replace this conditional probability, which is a ratio of joint probability and marginal probability. So that's why we be something like Pxy minus log Py. And once again, here I get here depends on xy, and here I've got things which depends on y. Right. So what will give me the next so what I want to do is to express the conditional probability in terms of usual probability, conditional entropy in terms of usual. This part we see joint probability, entropy, and what about this term? It depends only on y, and here we have both x and y. But if I sum over x, I will get the marginal probability. So our x will turn this probability into marginal probability, which is this part. So this is nothing but hy. So the conditional probability appears to be related to the joint probability and the marginal probability. And so actually, and what we have already known is that this probability can be negative, because it's the averaging non-negative quantity. So it appeared to be.
And so we can say that general entropy more or equal marginal entropy.
Yep. Sorry.
Once again, how did we get entropy of y there?
So once again, the second term depends on the y.
Yeah.
If I sum over x, I will get the marginal probability.
So Py we get.
Right. So the
Marginal
okay. Probability
yeah,
and
yeah,
the same marginal probability.
Yeah, got it.
Right.
Shouldn't it be some in the right? Summarizing in the right part of the equation, or x.
Why we just described logarithm?
Sorry? What the question? Summarizing what do you mean?
So in the left part of this equation we have summarizing over x and
Yes. This is
yes, and after that we don't have summarizing. After
where? No. This is for base part.
okay.
This relation, which it should be inserted instead of this logarithm. So it's about this one. So, what we get? So we have xy. And actually can interchange x and y. And this is just a chain rule representing this. So this is a relation between the joint entropy and conditional entropy. So actually both of these formula implies that, for example, if I want to compute joint entropy, so it always looks like the entropy of one of the random variable here or here. Plus conditional entropy when this entropy becomes conditional. So, so you may ask the question, what happens if I use, for example, several random variables? Can I generalize? So this is the so-called chain rule. Looks like differentiation chain rule, but the meaning is different. So in generalized form, it means that, for example, we have x1, x, say k. So how to compute the idea? Let's start from the beginning. The first term is x1. And second term bx2 and how do you think the third term looks like? X3. So it will be conditional. And so on. Xk. So this is a generalized chain rule. So the chain rule relates its joint entropy and conditional entropies. And actually, once again, so here, for example, if we have 3, if we are talking about these conditional probabilities, for example, we're talking about x1. Three. Simplified notation, we have three random variables, and the joint probability describing these three random variables, and this is how the conditional probability introduced. This is a marginal distribution obtained by tracing out the first random variable. So it's just a definition of any conditional probability used in this relation. Actually, it's a bit of exercise to show that this is indeed the case. So we have to just use a representation of joint probability using different conditional probabilities. Again, I'm reluctant to give you this as an exercise, as a problem, because you don't have time to prepare this problem. And on the other hand, I don't have time to spend on proving this problem. So just note that it can be proved, and it's not very difficult to do.
So this chain here.
So yes, this is a just manipulation with this x1, xk, right?
Alexey Denisovich, shall we take a break?
Just a moment. Let me check how many things I have to do. Maybe in 5 minutes. Yeah. So once again, so what we have that. Let's suppose that we have. So this is an inequality, which means that conditioning doesn't increase entropy. This maybe it's something that might be expected, right? So compared to entropies, one is I'm talking about uncertainty determined by the random variable x, and here I'm assuming that I know something, that I have signed information about the other correlated random variable y. So it looks like that this should be somehow larger, and now the difference between But let me just put a question mark indicates that we will discuss this inequality later. But the difference between these two entropies plays a very important role in information science, and it is called mutual information. Mutual. And it's sometimes called Y. Is a mutual information.
But it sounds like logical, so when we have some additional information, the entropy decreases in system. Or it doesn't work in this way.
So additional information. So the main conditioning does not increase entropy.
And decrease
So-
also, it does not decrease. It doesn't change.
Yes. So if you have additional information, so you expect that uncertainty will go lower. So, and actually, how much lower is characterized by the difference, which is called the mutual information. And so you may ask, what happens, for example, if you have uncorrelated random variables? They are statistically independent. So, for statistically independent, what can be said about the conditional entropy? Maybe? Because conditional entropy and entropy
Conditioning
give me
on the one part of system doesn't give us any information about the second one. So there will be equality.
It's like it was inserted in one point of system and on the other one. And they're like the same
you have
uncertainty.
X and Y independent, right? Such as X. As we know, this is the case when the entropy is additive, right? But in the general case, this is equals nothing, for example, as y. So if you have statistically independent here, so this is just entropy of
So they
variable. So this is when we have equality. So we have inequality saturated. So the mutual information in this case 0. It is characterized the correlation between random variables. If these random variables are uncorrelated, the mutual information just 0. So whatever. If you learn something about some random variable which is not some anyway correlated with the random variable of your interest, so it is not related to the information about random variable x. So mutual information characterizes correlation between a random variable. So and
But why this correlation does not change entropy? It creates some limit in the system.
Sorry?
Why this correlation conditioning does not change entropy? Because it creates.
For, it doesn't change entropy only when
Okay.
the random variables
Separable.
are uncorrelated.
Mhm.
So this is a it means these two random variables such that
Mhm.
they are uncorrelated. Random variable.
Mhm.
So this is a measure of correlation between random variables. Actually, it's very important because typically, for example, you have the random variables at Alice and Bob, and somehow this random variable is changed during the transmission. So instead of X, Bob somehow gets Y. And but this Y is somehow correlated with the X, so we need to characterize the mutual information between the Bob and X shared by. But let us discuss it after the break. So. And once again, above inequality just implies that mutual information can be negative. It's not that clear because it should be proven, and it's a bit. It's an important thing. That is not direct consequences from the above properties, so we have to. And what we have to show once again is that alternatively, we know that this is nothing but hxy and minus y. If I insert this difference here,
Mhm.
I will get
Some of
information, mutual information in a bit symmetrical, written in the symmetric form. So clearly we'll get this sum of entropies and minus joint entropy.
and this I symbol just a symbol for this
Information.
The mutual information.
information.
Mutual information, this is such.
Mhm.
Which is what. In literature, we have a variation, and we have to dot here. Okay. Okay. Let's take a break.